According to information later aligned with federal case files, Prince, the seemingly immortal musical genius, collapsed within the sacred confines of Paisley Park itself. When the autopsy findings surfaced, the reaction was immediate and visceral, as if the world collectively stopped breathing. Toxicology results pointed to fentanyl concentrations in his blood and liver that investigators described as extraordinarily elevated, exposing a devastating reality few were prepared to confront. The electric figure who once dominated the stage with color, motion, and defiance now appeared, in hindsight, as a man drawing a purple veil over years of unrelenting physical pain and a carefully concealed dependence. He had persuaded millions that he was untouchable. The evidence told a far harsher story. Prince's final days, as reconstructed from reports and timelines, unfolded in near-total silence, marked by isolation and mounting desperation. For those of us who have followed the lives of icons for decades, this revelation landed as more than a headline. It felt like a collective injury. It underscored a truth law enforcement files often reveal after the applause ends. Brilliance does not grant immunity. The items cataloged after his death, prescription containers, medical traces, overlooked warnings, read like annotations in an FBI dossier, each line colder than the last. Even now, revisiting these documents sends a chill through anyone who believed the legend alone told the whole story. Before we examine, document by document, what lay behind Prince's luminous public image, remember to like and subscribe so you do not miss further investigations into the hidden realities behind the world's most enduring legends. People always described Prince as a symbol of permanence, an artist seemingly born to exist forever beneath the glare of the spotlight. And for decades, the image held true. Each public appearance, sequined attire catching the light, guitar resting against his body, hair flowing freely, pulled audiences into a controlled musical storm. He could bend a note, stretch a vocal line to the edge of silence, then stop with surgical precision, detonating the stage in applause. That authority belonged only to a rare genius. Yet, according to later referenced federal documents, behind that incandescent glow, his private life was quietly eroding under a pressure no one publicly anticipated. The autopsy would later strip away that illusion, revealing a grim conclusion. The man who once sang Purple Rain with abandon was confined within a daily, unspoken battle he never acknowledged in public. What investigators found most unsettling was that, in his final days, Prince continued to perform with what appeared to be limitless energy. Only days before his death, he stood on stage in Atlanta, voice intact, hands moving effortlessly across keys and strings, giving no outward signal of distress. Friends and professional associates later told authorities that he seemed like the Prince we always knew, driven, charismatic, and hungry for performance. Yet this brilliance functioned as camouflage. While audiences witnessed an ageless icon, internal evidence suggested a body under severe strain, exhausted, in pain, and increasingly dependent on medication to endure. From a journalistic perspective shaped by decades of examining celebrity lives after the fact, the deeper tragedy is not solely the loss of a legend, but the collective willingness to accept the myth he presented. Prince, a black artist who challenged the rigid norms of the American music industry in the 1980s, learned early that survival often meant concealment. He broke boundaries of gender expression, sound, and image, and in doing so felt compelled to project flawlessness. In a society still marked by prejudice, weakness was a luxury he did not allow himself. He once remarked that music saved him. Federal summaries now suggest a bitter irony. That same devotion drove him beyond physical limits until chemical relief became a necessity. The most chilling detail in the autopsy file was numerical, not emotional. Toxicology revealed painkiller concentrations far exceeding levels commonly documented in severe cases: 67.8 micrograms per liter in his blood and 450 micrograms per kilogram in his liver. These sterile figures, preserved in official records, point to an extended period of physical suffering that language struggles to capture. Investigators traced possible origins to a chronic hip injury, likely aggravated by decades of relentless performance, kneeling, spinning, dancing without reprieve. Rumors had circulated for years. The report transformed speculation into confirmation. Prince was not superhuman. He was a man whose body had finally reached its limit. Equally devastating was his silence. No interview, no public confession ever revealed an admission that he needed substances simply to function. Those close to him told investigators he spoke rarely of pain. Fans saw omnipotence. Backstage accounts described repeated collapses. On April 15th, when his private jet made an emergency landing in Illinois, it should have been an unmistakable warning. Yet hours later, he left the hospital, smiled for photographs, signed autographs, and resumed his journey. That concealment, simultaneously defiant and desperate, became what some investigators later described as a purple illusion, beautiful, intoxicating, and fatally fragile. That illusion endured until the final moment at Paisley Park. He was discovered in a familiar space, one that had borne witness to countless recordings and legendary nights. This time, there was no music, only an oppressive silence. When the news broke, disbelief spread worldwide. Few imagined that the so-called immortal of Minneapolis had spent his last days in such isolation. The concerts, the applause, the lights were merely a curtain. The autopsy, clinical and unforgiving, ultimately documented the hidden tragedy of a man who convinced the world he was eternal, even as his body quietly gave way. On the night of April 15, 2016, as the Atlanta sky dimmed following a blistering performance, federal timelines later noted a stark contrast between spectacle and reality. For more than 2 hours, Prince had commanded the stage, his slight frame radiating force, laughter punctuating soaring vocals, fingers racing across the keys in what witnesses described as a near-spiritual rite. Tens of thousands were drawn into that ritual, unaware that mere hours later, the same man would be found motionless on the floor of a private jet, breath shallow, prompting a frantic emergency landing in Illinois. Subsequent investigative summaries would make clear this was not routine fatigue, but an early warning signal of a tragedy already in motion. Accounts gathered from those on board described the collapse as shocking and disorienting. Prince, known for guarding his vulnerability, suddenly appeared stripped of the myth of invincibility. Medical responders administered an antidote as cabin lights flickered over a scene frozen in disbelief. Minutes mattered. A brief recovery followed, yet no explanation came. According to later statements, he rose, composed himself, and carried on as if determined to erase the incident from record, as though it were an illusion rather than a medical emergency. Publicly, the narrative was softened. News outlets were told he suffered from a severe flu or exhaustion from touring. Headlines echoed reassurance, and fans accepted it readily. Prince had long trained the world to believe in his impossibility. But internal inquiries would later point to another storyline forming beneath those reports: persistent rumors of reliance on potent pain medication tied to a chronic hip injury. At the time, there was no proof, only patterns. Years of kneeling, spinning, collapsing, and rising again had produced art that felt indestructible. The body behind it was not. Investigative interviews later confirmed that surgery had been recommended. He declined. Religious conviction played a role, as did an aversion to appearing physically compromised. Instead, he endured quietly. Medication began as relief, then escalated, becoming what one later described file termed silent companions, tools that enabled performance while narrowing the margin between control and collapse. The irony, meticulously noted in reconstructed timelines, is that within 24 hours of the Illinois incident, Prince reappeared publicly. Rather than retreat, he welcomed fans at Paisley Park, sat at a piano, smiled, and promised he would be shining again in a few days. Recordings of that moment are now unsettling. What sounded like reassurance reads, in hindsight, as resolve edged with desperation, an attempt to convince both himself and the world. Other details emerged quietly. The flight carried only a small inner circle. A trusted assistant, alarmed as consciousness faded, called for help, later becoming a central witness. Descriptions recall the hum of engines, dim cabin light, and a body slipping into stillness. That testimony also confirmed regular medication use in the period leading up to the incident, though its origin remained opaque. Privacy was Prince's constant, even those closest knew fragments, never the whole. In retrospect, the Illinois landing marked the first rupture in the legend. It was the moment the illusion cracked, revealing not an immortal icon, but a man leaning on chemistry to continue forward. Investigators would later characterize it as the initial peak, the warning bell. At the time, few were ready to hear it. The world kept believing, and Prince kept wearing the deep purple mask. Days later, that mask fell entirely, leaving an absence no document can fill. Yet on April 15th, when the jet descended in panic and an antidote pulled him back, the sky itself seemed to tremble, as if marking the opening of the final chapter in the life of one of music's most enduring figures. On April 21, 2016, Minnesota appeared calm on the surface, but inside the sprawling Paisley Park compound, once a private creative fortress, an unthinkable scene was unfolding. Prince, the man who had once made the world sway to Purple Rain and commanded audiences with effortless authority, was discovered motionless inside an elevator in his own estate. Paisley Park, designed as both sanctuary and shield, a place where music, privacy, and control converged, instantly transformed into the epicenter of global grief. The symbolism was brutal. An ordinary elevator, meant only for movement within his vast home, became the place where the illusion of immortality finally collapsed. Those present later recalled a suffocating stillness. There was no music drifting through the halls, no hurried footsteps, no trace of the purple glow that had so often defined the space. Only silence and shock. The irony cut deeper when fans revisited lyrics from Let's Go Crazy, where Prince had once used the elevator as a metaphor for downfall, urging listeners to fight back. Fate, however, chose that very image to conclude his story. What once felt poetic now read like a cruel premonition. Within 24 hours, the autopsy was conducted, and with it came figures that dismantled every remaining myth. The medical examiner documented 67.8 micrograms per liter of fentanyl in his blood and 450 micrograms per kilogram in his liver, levels far beyond accepted danger thresholds. These were not speculative whispers, but forensic facts, establishing that Prince had relied on a synthetic opioid many times stronger than morphine to survive his final days. The revelation stunned the public. This was not a sudden accident, but the outcome of a prolonged, silent confrontation with pain. Fentanyl's reputation only intensified the shock. In medical practice, it is precise and unforgiving. Even minimal miscalculation can prove fatal. And here lay the ultimate paradox. Prince, a man known for absolute control over sound, timing, and detail, lost control over the substance sustaining him. The same precision that mesmerized millions could not save him from an invisible, numerical margin inside his own body. As news spread, disbelief followed. From Minneapolis to Tokyo, from New York to Paris, grief rippled outward. Accidental fentanyl overdose became a phrase repeated endlessly, clinical, blunt, and devastating. What made it unbearable was the realization that Prince had never publicly acknowledged this struggle. He guarded his image relentlessly, choosing the stage over vulnerability. When the truth surfaced, the shock doubled, loss compounded by the exposure of a private collapse hidden behind brilliance. Paisley Park soon transformed from guarded enclave into a site of mourning. Fans covered its gates with purple flowers, candles burned for days, and voices cracked while singing Purple Rain. Alongside grief came unanswered questions. How could someone surrounded by professionals descend so deeply into dependence? Was it secrecy, pride, or an unyielding refusal to admit weakness? Those answers remain locked in silence. Investigators later uncovered unsettling details. Numerous medication containers were found throughout the property, some mislabeled, others concealed inside vitamin or aspirin bottles. The implication was chilling. Concealment had become routine. A home once dedicated to creativity had evolved into a maze of secrecy, reflecting an obsession with control and an unwillingness to be seen as vulnerable. Toxicology findings reinforced the severity. Prince's fentanyl levels exceeded most cases recorded in medical literature. Where others might show dangerous concentrations between 3 and 58 micrograms per liter, his measured 67.8. His liver's accumulation confirmed repeated heavy exposure. Beyond personal tragedy, the case exposed systemic failures, how such substances circulated under false labels, and how easily they reached even the most protected lives. That day, Paisley Park closed like a stage after a black velvet curtain. The final curtain fell not to applause, but to silence. Prince, who redefined music and identity, became a stark reminder of the fragility beneath genius. And in remembering him, the world now recalls not only the purple guitar and the anthems, but the quiet truth that even legends can be undone by pain no one else ever sees. A year after the final curtain fell at Paisley Park, investigators returned to what had once been Prince's creative sanctuary. They were no longer looking for unreleased tracks or musical ideas, but for answers. What they uncovered inside those familiar rooms, behind wooden cabinets, inside drawers, among ordinary-looking medicine bottles, opened a darker, more unsettling chapter of his story. Numerous vials of medication, many concealed in unexpected places, painted a picture of a life lived within layers of secrecy, far removed from the public image of control and mastery. These were not harmless prescriptions neatly stored. Some containers carried no labels at all. Others were deliberately hidden inside vitamin or aspirin bottles. To seasoned investigators, the message was unmistakable. Concealment was intentional. Prince had been hiding from colleagues, from friends, and perhaps most of all, from the fans who believed in his invincibility. The layout of those hidden substances resembled a carefully constructed maze, revealing a persistent fear of exposure and judgment, and an understanding that if the truth surfaced, the myth of immortality would fracture. No official record could pinpoint when this path began. Medical files were sparse, and Prince's privacy was legendary. Former associates recalled that as early as the 2000s, pain followed him after performances. The hip that had absorbed decades of relentless movement, spins, kneels, sudden drops, had begun to fail. Surgery was reportedly advised, yet rejected. Some cited religious belief, others suggested fear that surgical intervention would compromise the fluidity that defined his art. Whatever the reason, the choice was silence, and silence demanded chemical assistance to keep him upright. What made the situation more elusive was Prince's pride. He cultivated an image of vitality and discipline, working endlessly in the studio through long nights of writing and experimentation. Visitors saw energy, not decline. He sang, played, and laughed as if immune to physical limits. That performance convinced everyone around him. Fans celebrated his productivity, the media chronicled his comebacks, and peers admired his relentless drive. Behind that brilliance, however, was a struggle known only to him. There were moments when cracks appeared. During meetings, he reportedly could not remain seated for long, constantly shifting to ease pain. Yet once on stage, the suffering vanished. Music functioned as an anesthetic, masking every physical signal. When the lights went down and the audience dispersed, the pain returned, and with it, the pills, increasingly potent and frequent, filling the void left by silence. Paisley Park, vast and echoing, held more than archives of sound. Medication was found throughout the estate, in suitcases and drawers never meant for such items. This distribution suggested routine, not emergency use. Dependence had woven itself into daily life. One can imagine the contrast, a radiant figure in the studio by day and a solitary presence at night, navigating empty rooms in search of relief. Seen through a broader lens, the tragedy deepens. Prince, a black artist who spent his life defying industry barriers, carried the weight of constant expectation. Strength was not optional, vulnerability was a liability. In that context, admitting pain felt impossible. The pills became a final line of defense, a fragile shield against a world that expected perpetual brilliance. Ultimately, that shield failed. When the autopsy findings emerged, the picture became clear. Prince had lived for years balanced between light and shadow. Paisley Park was not merely a music complex, it was a fortress concealing a private storm. Among guitars and microphones were small containers that quietly dictated the fate of a legend. Secrets in the Shadows is perhaps the most accurate epitaph for his final chapter. He lived in the spotlight, while the darkness behind him grew steadily. The illusion held, until it didn't. And when it collapsed, it revealed not weakness, but a human cost borne alone by a genius the world never believed could break. After the most painful disclosures, after the stark toxicology figures and the sealed secrets uncovered at Paisley Park, it might have seemed inevitable that darkness would consume the image of Prince. Yet federal summaries and cultural reaction revealed a paradox. The more devastating the truths became, the brighter his legacy appeared. Much like the purple glow in Purple Rain, it did not fade after the storm. It intensified. Fans did not retreat, colleagues did not turn away, and the media, rather than dwelling solely on forensic detail, pivoted toward remembrance, choosing to honor him through the very force that defined him: music. The BBC moved quickly. On July 6th, just over a year after his death, the broadcaster devoted an entire day to revisiting Prince's artistic journey. Programs such as Prince and His Songs at the BBC, Prince, A Purple Rain, and Prince and the Revolution Live, 1985, were aired in succession. Archival interviews, performances, and concert footage formed a clear editorial message. Remember the melodies, not the medication. The rebroadcast of the 1985 concert proved especially powerful. Viewers saw Prince at his physical and creative peak, voice fierce, body unburdened. Many watched in tears, no longer out of shock, but in reverence for a talent that had permanently altered music. Grief gradually transformed into gratitude. Memorials emerged across continents. Fans wore purple, carried purple flowers, and sang Purple Rain beneath actual rainfall. In Minneapolis, bridges glowed violet night after night. In New York, his music filled Times Square. In Paris, street musicians turned his songs into an impromptu festival. Borders dissolved. A shared language emerged. Prince's work had embedded itself into collective memory. From an analytical standpoint, Prince's endurance lies in his role as a musical revolutionary. He dismantled the boundaries between funk, rock, soul, and pop, synthesizing them into what became known as the Minneapolis sound. He wrote, produced, and performed with near-total autonomy, redefining artistic independence. The revelations of pain and dependency did not diminish these achievements. They reframed them. Understanding that much of his output was created while his body was compromised only deepened respect for the scope of his work. Critics often describe Prince as a figure of contradiction, commanding yet vulnerable, controlled yet constrained, defiant yet isolated. Those contradictions fueled music that resonated because listeners recognized themselves within it. His songs carried insecurity, longing, and defiance. When the truth surfaced, the legacy did not fracture. It became more human and therefore more enduring. One detail gained renewed attention during the investigation: the vault. Thousands of unreleased recordings were discovered at Paisley Park, a vast private archive. These songs, stored away for years, suggested an artist who never stopped creating. They now function as extensions of his life's work, reinforcing the belief that Prince still has more to say, more to give. Beyond personal loss, his legacy carries broader significance. Prince became a symbol of artistic sovereignty, particularly within the Black creative community. His public protest against record label control, writing "slave" on his face, remains a defining act of resistance. These battles, quiet and overt, are inseparable from his cultural impact. What ultimately resonates most is not just brilliance, but fragility. Once the illusion of invincibility dissolved, Prince emerged as profoundly human. That vulnerability did not weaken the bond with his audience, it strengthened it. His story affirmed that genius can be fragile and still immortal. When Prince and the Revolution Live 1985 aired again, many viewers felt they were witnessing a living presence. Not the Prince of his final days, but the electrifying force of his youth. It confirmed a simple truth. What Prince left behind transcends tragedy. A legacy beyond pain, one that outlives toxicology numbers, silence, and loss, endures in every note of purple light he cast upon the world. In the final assessment, the story of Prince is not merely the account of a musical legend undone by physical pain and substance dependence. It is also documentary evidence of how talent and devotion to art can transcend even the darkest circumstances. Investigative records outline a life lived at full intensity, like a sustained flame, brilliant, consuming, and impossible to ignore. Even as darkness closed in, that light left a permanent imprint on millions. Paisley Park, once cataloged as a private estate in official files, has since become something else entirely, a sanctuary where his work continues to resonate. And when the final notes of Purple Rain rise, the conclusion becomes clear. Prince did not vanish, he shifted form, becoming memory, influence, and guidance for generations that follow. If this account struck a chord, leave a like, share your reflections in the comments, and subscribe as we continue examining the realities behind the spotlight, where celebration and suffering intersect, and where every legend, when the record is complete, is revealed to be human, deserving not only admiration, but empathy and respect.